Well, I think if someone is rude to us or we perceive someone is being rude to us, of course we're going to be irritated, frustrated, or maybe even really angry, which is going to mean there's a greater likelihood of us responding with stress-related behavior, negative behavior, either being rude in return or being rude to them, which then may cause them to get frustrated because maybe they weren't intending to be rude or they didn't perceive their behavior as rude, but then we're being rude to them, and so then that causes this increase in conflict when it was really just simply the result of a miscommunication or a perception of something that wasn't intentional.
What is the difference between incivility and rudeness, and why does this distinction matter in everyday life?
I think the answer to that question will vary depending upon who you talk to. So, of course, when you're talking to a psychologist, the answer is always going to be, it depends. But for me, for me, I think of them in very much the same way. I'll tell you, some people make the distinction that rudeness is intentional, incivility is unintentional. That's the distinction some people make. But I don't see it that way because I think people can be rude without intention or also uncivil without intention. So I don't think that that distinction really matters in everyday life. What matters more is how we are interpreting other people's behavior and whether we think of their behavior as intentional or not. That's probably going to influence our how we respond.
And can you define incivility? One thing I love for our audience to do is to go to the dictionaries and actually do the critical thinking, but just to make it a little easier for them, what is incivility in that way?
I think of it as it's rude and inconsiderate behavior that creates stress in the target of the behavior, in people witnessing the behavior, and even also ultimately boomeranging back to the person who her or himself is being uncivil. Some people talk about incivility as behavior that is outside the expected norms of whatever the environment is. So, and certainly in workplaces, like workplaces have some sort of expected norms of behavior. And so workplace incivility is when someone's behavior violates whatever those norms are.
And on the topic of incivility, is it possible to have incivility for yourself? You discuss intrapersonal incivility. What precisely is that? And does it really have an impact on us?
Great question. Um, so, intra personal, sort of within us, incivility is about the messages that we give ourselves, the self-talk that goes on in our heads. And people are sometimes a little bit confused when they first come to meet with me as a therapist or as a coach, and I talk about self-talk or what are you saying to yourself? And it's a bit of a newsflash for people to understand that we all do this. Like we have these dialogues in our head. And if we are being uncivil to ourselves. A different way to say this is depending upon how active our internal critic is. Well, the way we treat ourselves is going to influence the way we treat other people. So if we are being unreasonable and harsh with ourselves, then that's going to create stress in us, and our stress-related negative behaviors are going to be more likely to leak out, one of which can be being uncivil. But equally so, the other thing is if we are treating ourselves poorly, and that's the norm, then we can then end up treating others in the same way.
What precisely is it to treat yourself poorly? We talk about critical talk or critical thoughts in that way. What are those things? Because the reason I'm asking such basic but important questions is because I
Mhm.
want to build out from here. And I feel like it all starts again within. But there are so many things that people probably do in their daily lives. They don't even realize that this is really affecting them day to day, but they're continuing to do it. What are
Yes.
these activities, behaviors that you see people doing?
Well, if you will permit me, I'd like to tell a story because I think it illustrates. I tell clients this story, and it comes from my days of running half marathons and marathons, which are well gone by. We all have to go through the marathoning phase. Um, but so this goes back several years. I was running the half marathon here in Portland, Maine, where I'm from. And when you get to the final 2 miles, you come to this body of water called Back Cove. And so you turn onto Back Cove and you can see the finish line and you can hear the crowd. So they seem very close, but then in your mind, you know you've still got 2 miles to go. So, and I don't know if you've ever done long distance races, but you usually get to the end of a race, at least I do, and you're thinking to yourself, why did I sign up for this? Who got me into this mess? And then you realize it's you. So all these, I just want out, get me out of here, but you want to finish the race. So I always will entertain myself by um, distracting with something. And so in a race like this, I always pick someone. I play the game of who can I beat? So I think, oh, maybe I can catch that person. So in this case, I was looking and I saw this guy in front of me running, and I thought, I bet I can catch him before the finish line. We'll call him Bob, not his real name. So I start to catch up to Bob, and over the course of, so there was 2 miles to go initially. So maybe now over the course of a quarter mile to a half mile, I caught Bob, where I was now up within close of striking distance. And at this point, out comes this guy on a bike who was maybe Bob's friend or Bob's coach. He decided it was going to be Bob's coach that day. So he pulls up beside Bob and he said on his bike and he says, "Looking good, Bob, looking good." And I'm thinking to myself, Bob knows he's not looking good because I'm not looking good. None of us are looking good out here. But then this guy on the bike looks over his shoulder and sees me gaining on Bob. So then he says to Bob, "Bob, you got a guy right behind you. He's gaining on you. You can't let him pass you, Bob. You can't let him pass you." And Bob looks over his shoulder and he's panicked and he tries to speed up, but it's the end of a long race. He doesn't have much left. So there's this bit of a back and forth. So, and I'm slowly gaining on him, and the guy on the bike is yelling at Bob to he needs to keep going, and um, the therapist in me is like, "Oh, this is terrible. I need to stop, and I should just let Bob win." Then I was like, no, this is the gridiron. I'm gonna do best I can." So I got right up to beside Bob and about to pass him, and the guy on the bike screamed, "Don't let him pass you, Bob. What are you, a girl?" At which point I wanted to shove the guy on the bike over and say, "Shut up and leave poor Bob alone." But I didn't have enough energy for that. So I kept going. I crossed the finish line about a mile from there. And I turned and looked because you could look back about a third of a mile when you've crossed the finish line. No Bob. This guy on the bike had successfully burned Bob out, humiliated him, that not only was he not able to give his best, he probably interfered with Bob finishing. So the reason I tell that story is because we all have people like this guy on the bike in our heads, that some of us more than others, but that are critical and thinking we are going to motivate ourselves through perfectionism, through harsh talk, through shaming ourselves or judging ourselves. But in fact, it only ends up being a demotivator, and a source of distress.
Apologies if I'm extending this analogy too much
Okay.
or this story too much. So I'm Bob. I have the guy on the bicycle who's yelling at me in my head. But who are you in this story? Like in relation to everybody else? Like, is it also a facet of our psyche that feels like we're in this constant state of anxiety? Somebody's always going to gain on us, somebody's always trying to come for us, and so we have that inner critic telling us? Or is this a response to society? Is this a response to culture? Is this a response to relationships?
Not sure I totally understand your question, but you mean sort of in this scenario where Bob's Bob's the runner, guy on the bike is the critic. Where do I see in that scenario what my role is, right? Well, so I think if we think about what happened there as um, representative of an individual, right? So we have the person who's trying to function, Bob. We have the inner critic, guy on the bike. I would say in that situation, if we think about this as a microcosm of me, um, in that situation, I represent mindful perspective or objective awareness, the part of ourselves that can disconnect and detach and see, oh, wow, like here I am, I'm trying to do this, but wow, my inner critic is highly active and is going to interfere with my ability to function. So I see in mindfulness, sometimes it's called the observing ego, or just simply perspective that we can take, because I think many people don't develop that part of themselves. And so they're simply caught up in trying to function, and they have this harsh critic, and they're not even necessarily aware that that harsh critic exists in that way, or that they have a choice over how much they want the guy on the bike to be motivating them.
You know, it's so interesting how this critical speak affects us so much. But is that a facet of society or is that a facet of psychology? And what I'm trying to ask is that natural or is that nature or is that nurture? Did we learn that or are we born with that?
Well, that's a very big question. So I love your big questions. I would answer that it's a mix of both, because I think we are all born with a certain nature s- that comes from the genetic predispositions that we have from our families of origin. And so, and some of that is going to be about, um, I mean, some of it's going to be about hair color and eye color, but some of it's also going to be about our capacity for emotion regulation, or what is our natural tendency for thought process. And then that gets combined with environment, family environment, but beyond family, then cultural environment, other things that we are exposed to uh, socially, and that's going to then cause a shaping of us, not just psychologically, but biologically. You know, that when I was in college a billion years ago, we used to talk about this distinction of nature versus nurture as being very um, uh, polar or whatever. It was one or the other. But what we now know is that environment shapes biology and biology shapes environment. There's this iterative process that happens between them. I think it's the short answer to your question is, I think our thought process and this critical part of us is a product of both nature and nurture.
So now that we've understood kind of where this comes from, what it is, how does this affect not just us, but the people around us? What is this rudeness or incivility? Um, I'm guessing, what is the root cause of rude behavior? Is it something to do with just us, or is this also a trained mechanism of if somebody's rude to me, I have to be rude to them? If somebody says something that I don't like, I have to be rude to them. Is that a natural reaction or a learned response?
In terms of the roots of rude behavior, there are many of them. So I would say that your point about if someone is rude to us, is our, you know, is it our natural response to be rude back? Well, I think if someone is rude to us or we perceive someone is being rude to us, um, then our natural response, of course, it's we're going to be irritated, frustrated, or maybe even really angry, which is going to mean there's a greater likelihood of us responding with stress-related behavior, negative behavior, being rude, either being rude in return or being rude to them, which then may cause them to get frustrated because maybe they weren't intending to be rude or they didn't perceive their behavior as rude, but then we're being rude to them, and so then that causes this increase in conflict when it was really just simply the result of a miscommunication or a perception of something that wasn't intentional. So that's certainly one of the roots. There's many. You know, we'll talk about them, I'm sure, but cultural differences and what one culture, thinks is rude versus what another thinks is rude. Personality has something to do with it. How well someone copes with stress. There's lots of different factors that play into people's rudeness.
So I really want to tap into this cultural relativism of what is rude in one culture and what is rude in another culture, because then we're talking about rudeness, lowercase r, rather than rudeness, capital R,
Mhm.
which is a very interesting thing. Well, first of all, what is cultural relativism, and how do we deal with rudeness from that perspective?
Well, so, cultural relativism, as I understand it, and I'm certainly not the total expert on this, but is that when we view someone's behavior, and whether that's someone else's behavior or our own behavior, we have to understand that that behavior is shaped by and rooted in a certain cultural background. And we certainly people tend to think about culture as ethnic background, but that, to my mind, can also be about, even within a larger culture. for example, in the United States, there are also many subcultures in terms of where people live and regional differences, et cetera. So we need to understand where someone's from and as well as where they are living. Because if you take a New Yorker who or someone from, I grew up in Massachusetts and, Massachusetts, driving is like a contact sport. Like we get out there and, whereas other parts of the country, it's not. So you take someone from a more aggressive culture area, or whatever, and you plunk them down into the middle of another area where that is not at all what people are like. Well, that's going to be perceived as rude when, when in fact that's not what someone else's, awareness is. See, in some ways, it's about an awareness of what your culture is, but also what's the culture you are going into, and how is your behavior going to be perhaps perceived differently, or even what is your behavior that is being perceived as rude that you might not think of.
So, in a more direct way, can a rude behavior in one part of the world be considered rude?
Uh, Rude behavior in one part of the world be considered not rude in another part of the behavior the world is what you mean?
And vice versa.
Yes.
So, like, what is correct in that way?
Ah, correct. Well, we have to be aware correct is a judgment, right? Of correct being perceived by whom. Um, Now, interestingly enough, I was actually looking at something this morning, so I have my little notes here. There was a thing by MSN on a video that I'm happy to send to you that you could share with your listeners. And I don't know, I mean, I didn't have a time to do full research on how accurate this is, but it talks about things that people perceive as being very polite in one culture that are actually quite rude in another culture. Um, so for example, um, arriving on time. In some cultures, and if people are a few minutes late, well, that's considered to be rude. Whereas in other cultures, getting there on time or even early is really rude because you're not giving the host time to kind of get the place ready. Or, right, or tipping that I've certainly run into this in my travels in Europe and going to Germany, and because I'm sort of thinking, United States, at least 15% if that's decent service, 20% if it's or more if it's really good service. But in other parts of the world, if you are tipping people, um, it's considered offensive because in fact for them they're just being paid to do their job, and so why are you throwing this other money at me? I'm already been fairly reimbursed. So it's like you're almost like you're being patronizing. So there are these examples, and I'll send that video along. It just was interesting to be thinking about this idea that who gets to define what rude behavior is, and it varies based on culture.
And so, this also varies based on culture, but also personality. Should people be willing to apologize or forgive this aspect of rudeness in their culture? Because if we understand cultural relativism, how willing are people in terms of understanding that um, oh, this is an American in Japan, and so Japanese are, they're paid a fair wage, and tipping is not necessary or not even wanted. I know a story of the Japanese restaurant owner chasing the person out with the tip, running after them, saying, "No, no, no, you forgot your money," right? Should we be more accommodating and empathetic in terms of apologizing and forgiving, or is there a reason why we're not?
Oh, I think absolutely. Well, first of all, if we are motivated to try to be the best version of ourselves that we can be, and I truly believe most people are, then it's important to understand the impact of our behavior on other people. And so, absolutely, I think if we've done something that's like tipping, that we think is, oh, this is really great to say thank you, and it's seen as offensive. Well, then absolutely, to my mind, to be able to say, oh my gosh, that was not my intention at all. Certainly, I'll take the money back, but I was, kind of like, let me explain why I was leaving this. I mean, if you can speak the language, whatever the language may be, that sometimes is harder in places where you may not speak the language very clearly. Um, but absolutely, I think to own your behavior and learn from it. Just learn that for people, and if you are in a culture, if you're an American in Japan, then you have to learn, yeah, tipping is not something to do. if you are, if there's something, for example, that may not be that you're in the United States, but like another one that was on the list was shaking hands when you meet. For some people, I mean, that we do that a lot in the United States, but for some people, that's actually rude. Um, so being able to understand that if you go to shake someone's hand or something and they back off and um, to maybe apologize if that's something that like they were taken aback by it. It's adjusting your behavior not just based on the culture that you are in, but to my mind, based on the people you're interacting with. It seems like, again, if you want to be the best version of yourself, that's ideally what you would do.
The best version of ourselves. Um, so now we're talking about cultural relativism, and we brought up the environment
Mhm.
shaping us. So now we're in this globally connected cyberspace environment called social
Hmm.
media. And we have seen a massive rise of incivility and rudeness in this, as you call it, post-COVID rudeness syndrome.
Yes, well, I didn't come up with it. There was someone in Australia that actually created that. I just want to give credit to them. I don't know who it was, but yes, but I love that term, the post-COVID rudeness syndrome, a new diagnosis.
Yeah. So what is this post-COVID rudeness syndrome, and how does it relate to social media and the rise of incivility?
Well, I think when research on incivility first, it's been done certainly for many years, but I think it really got on the people's radar when Dr. Christine Porath started doing research on this back in the late 90s, and then in the early 2000s, and documenting the negative impact that incivility was having in the workplace. And this is something that she has tracked through the years. And I heard her speak in 2017, and that's really what got me interested in this topic and how to be approaching it with skills. But when the pandemic started, just much like in the United States, when we had 9/11, that was a sort of a really devastating event that brought our country together. And so, you know, when we've had these major crises, many times that's something that has brought our culture together for the most part. But at a time when I thought we might come together, the whole questioning of how real COVID was or where it came from. Is it really something that needs to be threatened? It became very politicized in our culture, as well as in other cultures too. It wasn't just in the United States. I heard from friends in Germany and other places in the world that this was also going on. Um, so the isolation that was going on during COVID, the politics and debate about okay, what's reality, what are facts, what's science around that. And certainly social media all combined to create this perfect storm in a negative way for incivility to rise. And then as the COVID-19 pandemic started to wane, I sort of thought, well, now will the wave of rudeness and incivility that's been going, well, that will start to reduce. But then it just seemed like that continued to further escalate. I think because of stress, because of politics, and also because of people's involvement in social media. And as someone who's less a user of social media than perhaps many of your listeners, um, I'm not as involved in that world. But what I have seen in some, certainly in Facebook and LinkedIn and environments, is that the anonymity that social media allows. Um, and as well as the fact that it's a mouthpiece that you can say whatever you want. People are using it as a way to vent their frustration and thinking that somehow by doing that, they are going to release their frustration. But what I tell my clients is you may think you're releasing your frustration, but what you're actually doing is you're rehearsing your frustration and you're just strengthening it more and more in a way that's not healthy.
And what is this reality of political correctness now and this immediate response to just these minor instances of rudeness and incivility? And also, do you think that social media has corrupted our sensitivity and made us way too sensitive to things?
Well, so there's lots of questions in that. Lots of things.
It's a theme of this
Yeah.
show. Is I'm going to ask you 17, and you can pick which 17 you want.
I'll pick three of the 17. Um, well, I think that so remind me your question is social media, what
I guess we should just start with, has social media reduced our sensitivity to rudeness?
um personally, I think so. Because I think people have become so accustomed to uncivil and rude behavior that's exhibited in social media, and whether they are simply witnessing it with a little bit of Schadenfreude, as the Germans say, taking pleasure in someone else being beat up on social media. I think that that certainly has desensitized people to it, and just seeing it as it's just a part of everyday life. It's just a part of it's a natural part of how people treat each other, and certainly in our country, and I think not just in our country, but certainly in the United States, many of our leaders will treat people poorly. And so that has also been modeled at the highest levels of government and seen as, in some ways, appropriate or allowable or just the norm. So I think that social media and as well as politics have also normalized something that I think is more problematic than people realize.
Let me just push back to make this
Please.
conversation more colorful. Let, let me take the stance and argue, doesn't it make more sense that social media should make us more bulletproof because we're seeing aggression and rudeness and incivility on these platforms all day, every hour of every minute in the comments section, on posts, on videos. Shouldn't this make us more attuned to rudeness in some way?
Well, attuned versus desensitized. Attuned, I see you as saying attuned being kind of like comfortable with it, or is it comfortable with it, or more aware of it, like, oh, this is terrible. Whereas I think it's just become so much a part of the fabric of every day that people become desensitized to it. Recognizing as we do that we have a generational chasm here because between you and me, because I'm not as much on social media as maybe you might be. Although I don't know, we haven't talked about that, but I think I think that people have become through social media and again through politics and other things just desensitized to the impact of rude behavior.
Well, just to answer your question, I am
Ah,
on social media. I use it more for the social aspect. I'm usually just on Instagram DMs
ah,
messaging my friends. But in terms of the media aspect, I try not to scroll too much. I think I'm down to like one or two
hmm
swipes per day. And I literally measure
hmm
it in that because I know that the information that I'm consuming, even subconsciously, is still
Yes.
affecting me. And I've
hmm
noticed that a lot. Um, why aren't you on social media? Just to take a little tangent, is it you never got on the hype train, or is that purposeful?
Well, as a therapist of many years, as a psychologist, um, we are, you know, ideally, we can be present for our clients and have good boundaries for them. And I think sometimes if the idea is for my generation, it was social media is something where if the more you are out there, the more than clients may want to connect with you on social media. And well, why aren't you being connected to people on social media? That's gonna be perceived as rude or inconsiderate if you're not open to that. So I think many people in my generation just didn't get on the bandwagon with social media because we didn't want to have that confusing experience for people that we were working with. Um, and I, again, having not grown up with it, I didn't really see that there was I was not convinced there was a usefulness for it. I remember when I first got a sport watch and for my running and the first thing workout that I had done. And when I finished, it offered me the chance to, hey, like post this somewhere, post it on Facebook, tell your friends. And I'm thinking, hey, my friends have their own lives. Like, what are they going to be home saying? Oh, did John go running today? How fast was he? It just seemed like very narcissistic. So I was like, I am not going to be doing this like that. Or when a client said to me, "Oh yeah, I was out. I did a live stream, a live stream or a Facebook Live while I was out dancing." I was like, "Why? Um, like help me understand. Like so, all your friends are sitting at home, like, oh good, there's John. I'll call him John. There's John out there having a life at the club, and we're home watching him. Like it just didn't make any sense to me. So for that reason, also, I just was not motivated to really get much on social media. So and my social media right now is really restricted to business. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on YouTube. Those are the places that I frequent more for business, not for personal. And I just want to echo and highlight what you said, which is being careful what you consume and the news information that you're consuming, good for you, because so many people, I think, are unaware of the negative impact of overconsumption of news has on them and on their health and mental health.
Well, speaking of precisely that, and we can give a little a nice bow of a segue, because when you constantly consume really bad stuff on social media, your mind starts warping around that because you think that that's how people are talking. We shouldn't underestimate the social aspect
Mhm.
of social media. It's still other humans for the most part. I know dead internet theory, most of the internet is bots now and it's just bots talking to bots. I get that
Mhm.
100%. But I'll give a very personal example. I've noticed this myself where I used to be a really big fan of Tesla, and then obviously there's this massive push against
Mhm.
Elon politically. I'm not going to comment on that, but I noticed myself looking at Teslas now and just having like this disdain. And I'm a fan, or at least I was a fan of Tesla, but now just by consuming something on
Mhm.
social media, my mind is already warped towards criticizing that. And that's just me being conscious of that switch. What do we do about that? Is it just this thing of getting off social media? Is there some way to tell people about that and get them to be more conscious of it? Is this a facet of media in general? Was this a facet of television networks and cable news back in the day?
Yes, I can speak to back in the day. That's my role, Ayush. Uh, I think it's important for people to understand that anything we consume, and whether that's food or whether that's, media of some kind, anything we consume is going to have an impact on us somehow, psychologically, physically, or both. And so being aware that, when we consume information, first of all, it's going to have a bias of some kind, even though some um, I think some media outlets aim to try to be more neutral in terms of, I mean, that's their goal. There still is going to be probably a bias one way or the other. So we have to understand that the information we are consuming is going to have a bias in some way. What might that bias be? And do we need to change that? Well, I'm going to give the psychologist answer again, which is it depends. Like how harmful is it to you that you have this perception of Teslas now? I mean, that just may be this negativity bias that you have right now, but will that last? Does it keep you from purchasing a Tesla that you have dreamed of purchasing? And is that a problem for you? Well, you have to look at, okay, what are the impacts of whatever bias you maybe have created or how, has been created in you, to then decide, is that something that needs to change?
And then coming back to the last portion of that gargantuan question I asked earlier about political
Uh-huh.
correctness, where does political correctness come from in that way? Is it because I know political correctness, so there's always nuances to this
Hmm.
politics nightmare, but it was usually used as a response to things, as a highlight of, hey, maybe we can look deeper into this, but now it feels like a band-aid over non-wounds. So has political correctness made us more sensitive to minor rudeness? And are we policing civility too much now?
Well, let's get clear about what we mean by political correctness. Can I ask how you are defining that?
I haven't thought deeply about this. I'll just say that at the front because I don't want to seem like a deep thinker where I'm not. And I'm
Hmm.
not a deep thinker at all, so I'll just say that as well. Um, Political correctness to me is just constantly nudging somebody about using language in a way that is so precise that you cannot really say anything. So, for example, if I were to say homeless now, somebody might correct me in Toronto and say we actually say houseless now. And again, we can have precise definitions, and that's important because again, home is a arbitrary concept where house is actually more precise. But at the same time, it feels like we're using political correctness in a way to just like like push people away from the conversation and try to police them in a way that feels
Okay. Yes, thank you.
unproductive.
Thank you for thank you for letting me ask you a question on your show.
The tables have turned.
Yes, look at that. Because I think about what is political correctness is going to vary based on again, who you're asking, because some people use that as a negative label to disparage someone, saying that you know, you just want me to use the right language. Or I remember a friend years ago was like, used to say political correctness. Oh, it's the thought police who are showing up to try to tell us how to think. And so it's used pejoratively. But I think there's another side to that, which is that people who are raising these issues are trying to highlight something, perhaps a bias or a misunderstanding or a naivete about some quality of some situation or person. And so it's in some ways when we talk about how we're defining whether someone's being politically correct or are they actually just raising awareness about some issue of diversity or some issue of someone being mislabeled. I mean, there's a lot of gray zone there. Now, to your other one of your other parts of your mega question uh, is are we being too politically correct? And how much do we need to sort of, I don't know if you said this, but like toughen up about those things? Is that what? Okay.
Let's go there.
Um,
Let's go there.
well, again, I'm just speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the American Psychological Association or all psychologists. I mean, again, I truly think there's a middle ground here that people can be raising important concerns and questions about, um, for example, the example that you used, that understanding why is it important for someone to be described as unhoused versus homeless? Like, what's the meaning of that for them? And understanding that maybe for someone to say, that you are homeless means like you don't belong. You don't have any place. You never had a place that you belonged, and you don't have a place that you belong. Um, Even though that's not our intention. So sometimes raising our awareness about something can be important. On the other hand, I think there is a reality that sometimes um, people who may be in their minds more enlightened about something can have less patience with those of us who haven't gotten the memo about changes in terminology and be very impatient with others, and especially others perhaps in older generations that don't know about these things or haven't heard something. And so I think there's a middle ground that people who are advocating for on the behalf of some group around a change in terminology or description, they have an important message. But in terms of being more patient with others who may not be catching on as quickly, and for people who are still using, for example, the term homeless. Well, to understand what's the impact of that description of using that and how might they, well, I'm just saying homeless, but how that could be actually offensive to someone and therefore, again, going back to if we want to be the best versions of ourselves, then don't we want to try to use language that is less offensive to other people, even if we don't mean it?
And in using language, like communicating, are there different communication styles and different communication preferences that affect these perceptions of rudeness?
Absolutely. If I may go back to culture for a minute, So I have good friends in Germany, and years ago, when I had met this friend, and we were I make rather merry around Christmas, so I will send gifts to my friends in the United States, but also to friends overseas. And so I sent some what I thought of as delicious coffee that's made here locally in Portland, and I thought, well, this will be a nice treat for my friends in Germany. Um, so I mailed the gifts and they opened them. And so this was all in German because I'm working on my abilities in German. And so I said to him, did you get the coffee? And his friend said, yep. And I said, did you enjoy it? And he said, no, it's not of good quality. So I gave it to my parents because they don't care about what kind of coffee they drink. All right. Now, in English, that was like, here I was so very proud of, but, in German, that wasn't offensive. That's just matter of fact. Germans are very matter of fact. So language matters. And the thing is, they laugh at me now now in speaking German, I'm still very indirect, whereas Germans are very direct. Versus, it's the thing, if Germans come to the United States and they are speaking English, but they are speaking, English, but with that Germanic cultural approach, well, they're perceived as very rude. Yes, right? Or like my friend who would say to her grandmother in German, Grandma, I hope you're alive the next time I visit. You wouldn't say that in English. That would be like so offensive. So language matters, and it's really influenced, I think, a lot by, among other things, culture. Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I remember going to the International Congress of Psychology in 2010 in Berlin, Germany, and I had just enough German. I knew some, but I really got the experience of what it's like to be someone who's an immigrant in a country where they don't speak the language. And I got so very frustrated on trying, this was in the day before I had a cell phone. I got so very frustrated on trying to figure out how to buy a phone card to be able to call home to tell people I was okay. And I would buy the phone card, I'd go to the phone booth, it didn't work. I'd go back, get another one. It was back and forth. But it was all about my inability to understand the instructions that were being given to me. And so, yes, that really has given me so much more empathy for people who aren't very facile with a language.
And what happens when we inject anger into the equation? What is the link between anger and rudeness? Is there a potential for healthy anger?
Let's start with the connection between anger and rudeness. Absolutely. I think that now, for some people, they don't separate their emotion from their behavior, meaning that I'm angry and therefore my behavior is going to be angry or aggressive behavior. And people don't understand that they can have a feeling like anger, but that doesn't necessarily have to translate into behavior. They don't have to act on their anger in an aggressive way. But many times people's anger gets manifested in rude and inconsiderate behavior. If people are feeling um, there's a I think it's called the feel good do good phenomenon in psychology, which is if people are feeling good, they're more likely to be generous, kind, um, helpful to other people. Whereas if they're in a bad mood, they're less likely to do that. And so so anger leads people to um, bubble over into their stress related negative behaviors and therefore be more likely to be rude. Now you give the other question you asked was about anger.
Is there a prospect of healthy anger?
Ah, and yes, absolutely. I think that recognizing that anger is a feeling, internal, that can be about our experience of an injustice happening or our needs not being attended to in a way that is respectful or something. So that's says something. We are perceiving something out of balance in our environment, or again, going back to respect, we're not getting appropriate or efficient customer service, as an example. And so I've had instances where, for example, I won't name my cell phone company to keep to keep the innocent from being unfairly labeled. But I joined a new cell phone company that I'm ultimately very happy with. But in the process of switching over, I had to have, I believe it was 13 or 14 contacts, individual times going into the store or also talking to customer service to get my cell phone set up correctly and to get my business set up correctly. Um, and at a certain point, I was saying, I have to say, I'm really angry right now. And this does not feel like it should be taking this many efforts. It's been very frustrating. I'm not blaming you, person I'm talking to, but I really want this resolved because it's a source of great frustration. So I was expressing my anger, but I was doing it in a reasonable, respectful, polite way, but I was still acknowledging that it was there. Um, and hey, they gave me free stuff for my pain, which was very nice. But if I had called up and been screaming and aggressive and angry, well, you don't get much. Maybe you'll get what you want, the issue resolved, but you are going to lose respect of the other person's respect for you potentially, and it's also you're not going to get all of what you could if you treated people respectfully.
Yeah, that if somebody ever talked to me the way that you just talked to me, of just looking me directly in the eyes and saying that they're very frustrated and angry, but it's not my fault, I'd be terrified. So I understand exactly
You
why.
would.
Yeah, that'd be absolutely terrified. I'll take the
Oh.
screaming and yelling any day of the week, but if somebody looks at me like that, I'll walk out the store. Um, there's one thing that I've always struggled with. So the other day, my girlfriend and I are talking, and we get into a bit of a scuffle, and
Mhm.
I say something just in a rude manner, and afterwards, I feel a lot of shame about saying that because I know it was incorrect for saying that. Is there any chance that rudeness could be correct, like a correct reaction, or is rudeness always incorrect? Because if I'm rude to somebody with no backing, I feel shame. If I'm rude to somebody that was rude to me, I feel empowered. If I'm rude to somebody that was rude to someone else, like if somebody's being racist to someone else and I stop the racism and I put them in their place and, you know, I feel like a superhero. What what is this spectrum or fluidity with rudeness?
Again, deciding is the behavior in fact rude? Maybe. Or is the behavior simply trying to match the environment that you're in? So I think about, for example, if we think about the behavior of raising one's voice, like raising the level or the tone that you're using, um, well, that can be perceived as aggressive, angry, or maybe even rude. But if in fact um, you are doing it to match the behavior of someone else. It's like you need to do that to be able to get their attention or to be able to advocate for yourself. That it actually may be effective behavior. I think about times when um, a lot of times customer service situations are coming to my mind right now. But when a customer service agent, I'm trying to talk to them and they have a spiel, and whether they're reading the spiel to me on the phone or whether they're giving me the spiel, and like not letting me, like they're saying things that aren't true to me, well, um, I'll pick on my cell phone company, although this didn't happen, but if they were saying to me, you know, you knew what you were getting into when you signed up for this company, and we've given you the best at the service that we can. And this is just you not being like, uh, or you must have missed it. I've had customer service people say to me, "Well, you must have misunderstood because this is very clear from the outset." And I'm trying to get a word in edgewise, and they're not letting me. And in that case, to be able to say, "Hang on a minute here. No, you need to listen to me," but like to interrupt them, to be able to say that's actually not, well, some people say, oh my God, that's being rude. But in fact, sometimes to be able to advocate effectively for yourself, that's something that's needed. So I'm going to give you the, I've done this a lot in our meeting. I'm going to give you the it depends, right? Right, but it's true because it's sometimes we actually need to be more assertive in ways that might even be seen as aggressive because that's the person that we're dealing with. Or like your example about stopping something racist that's happening. Um, Sometimes the only way to get attention is to be more direct and in some ways aggressive.
Why are you so obsessed with rudeness? What led you down this career path?
Well, what I say is a couple things. One is if you're going to be a good clinician, then, if we're going to be good clinicians, then we need to take hard looks at ourselves. And so part of the process for me going through my master's and then my piled higher and deeper PhD program to get my doctorate uh, was to be doing my own work on myself, whether through my own therapy or through mentoring or supervision, is to really do a lot of self-reflection. And I um, became aware of, my reactivity and that at times I could be engaging in stress-related negative behavior that I think could be rude. So part of it was understanding this, I'm not being my best self. This is not the person I want to be. So that was kind of early in my career. And then having worked with people for now almost 30 years, helping them develop skills to manage stress and to deal with um, trauma reactions, and I've worked with people around addiction. So I've taught people a lot of skills to manage their reactivity. And then when I heard Dr. Christine Porath speak in 2017 on this topic of incivility, that's really what whet my appetite to understand more of the impact that can have on people, both in the workplace and in the home space, as my book says. And then the pandemic hit, because I had this idea for a book about bringing together awareness of incivility and coping skills that you could use. And then the pandemic hit. And as we talked about earlier, it just seemed like the rude behavior escalated. And then when COVID started to wane and it didn't stop, that this idea, it really felt like it was a calling for me, that I needed to get this message out to the world that we have a choice about how we treat each other, and that it's not just about, oh, heck, it's the right thing to do, but also that if we don't change these behaviors, the rudeness and incivility in our societies will have direct impacts, as they already are, on our health, wellness, and longevity.
Is it a choice though? Like, I'm at a dinner table and I support X political side, and my parents or family members support Y political side. And X and Y are obviously in pure disagreement on varieties of political issues. If I'm on X or Y side, the other side is the destroyer. They are completely wrong. They've always been wrong. They will never be right. To me, that's not a choice. That's reality. How can I understand that reality is different from other people and come to these political situations in a less combative mode and more of like, hey, let's just have a discussion, and if we disagree, it's okay. Like, even if you're going to be very mean and rude to me, I don't have to take that stance to you.
Well, obviously, we're going back to it depends. There's lots of different things. Is it your parents that you're talking to versus friends versus just someone you met on an airplane? Um, um, Versus, just someone that you happen to run into at the post office and somehow you're striking up a conversation and somehow stuff comes up about politics. Well, in most political situations, and I'm not going to say all, but in most political situations, to think that one side holds the truth to everything is perhaps a little bit naive. Because I think many times there's a lot, and that's what's going on in our country. I don't know about yours, but certainly in our country, is there's this divisiveness and this belief that you're on one side or the other. And in fact, Pew Research is showing that instead of two political parties in the United States, there actually are nine. If we look at the ways that people's belief systems would aggregate, it's 16% of the United States are at the extremes, but 84% are somewhere in the middle. But when people start conversations, often it starts with that dichotomy of you're this side or that side. Whereas if you can have conversations with people about some issues, you learn that people are often fall somewhere on the shades of gray. Now, if someone is a family member and they cannot have conversations about the shades of gray, and they tend to think more extremely, what's the function of even trying to get into a conversation with them about it? What are you hoping to accomplish by getting into an argument with them? You're probably not going to change their perspective. They're certainly not going to change yours. And what it's going to do is damage the relationship. Do you care about the relationship? If you care about the relationship, then do you just say, let's just avoid this topic and not go there? Some people would say, but that's not real. I need to be able to be myself wherever I go. Uh, That's a choice. But then what you're choosing to do is to damage that relationship potentially. And even there are families that have had to sever relationships because of politics and differences in belief. And is that right or wrong? I don't know. I can't say, but you have to decide, is that like what's most important, relationships or belief systems?
The social dynamics are so hard to, you know, deal with. Are there, obviously, there are psychological and physical health factors. What are those? I guess we can start with physical health factors. Are there chronic effects that we can talk about?
And you're talking about of like dealing with rudeness and incivility.
Exactly.
So let's think about short term versus longer term. So certainly in the short term, when people are dealing with rudeness in their lives, that um, it's that stress associated with people treating us rudely or even witnessing rude behavior in other people and witnessing rude interactions that go on. Even that can have an impact on us where it creates stress which can contribute to things like um, anxiety, headaches, stomach aches, sleep disturbance, energy problems. And if someone has depression or anxiety already, addiction issues, it can worsen those disorders. Or maybe it can actually potentially with enough of the rudeness, it can actually trigger someone into a major depressive episode or like another episode of a mental health issue. So that's kind of in the short term. And in the long term, if people are dealing with chronic stress from rudeness and incivility, well, that poorly managed, especially if you carry around a lot of hostility, that has implications for our cardiac health and people can be more likely to have cardiac problems, high blood pressure, which can lead to heart attacks or stroke. People can have immune disorders as a result of the wearing down of the immune system from chronic stress. People sometimes develop cancers as a result of the impact of both environment and genetic predisposition, but also stress. So um, the impact of rudeness for our physiology is pretty potent.
We have to deal with this somehow. How do we maintain civility even when it's difficult? What what are your most influential pieces of advice for people who are aligning and resonating with your message, but just don't know where to start?
I will start with the recommendation that my doctoral advisor gave me in my PhD program is anytime I would come into her office and flop down and complain about someone of my peers or another faculty member, She was always very patient and she would listen, but just like a cat waiting in front of a mouse hole, she would just be waiting. And when I finished, she would say, "And what part of this is about you?" I always hated that question. What do you mean it's about me? But I encourage people that there's a value in that to just think about, okay, is there anything that I might be doing or not doing that is creating this reaction in other people? We don't know that that's the case, but I think it's starting with yourself. And is it something that I could be doing that could be triggering this reaction that I'm not aware of? Um, uh, Another thing is recognize that other people's behavior is not always about you. As much as we, love to think that the world revolves around us, it doesn't. So you have to understand that someone may be, have a negative tone with us, or they may be short in what they've said, or they may be expressing frustration. But, maybe they are just coming from their doctor and they got a diagnosis of some sort of serious health thing. Maybe they have a loved one who's just died. Like, we have no idea what other people are dealing with. So, when in doubt, start with the assumption that it's not about me. This is not about me. Um, and Other things I suggest people think about is what are the things that you can do to help regulate yourself? So I encourage people to think about breathing or mindfulness activity. Like we were talking about before in that example we talked about earlier with um, Bob, the poor runner who was shamed into not finishing or not finishing well, and the coach on the bike being the critic. Well, to have me in that scenario being that observing ego, the part of us that steps back and notices what's happening right now. That's mindfulness. Mindfulness can help us to develop that. The other thing I would suggest people think about using is the skill of active listening, where instead of responding to someone's point or discussion with, this is my view, instead saying things that reflect back to them what they have just said, or maybe even ask them, maybe even saying things like, well, how so? Or what do you mean? That gets someone to think about what they have just said and they have to rephrase it, perhaps. And in that way, you're holding up a mirror to get them to think about what have I just said and how am I going to restate it. And sometimes by doing that, it helps the person have an awareness of what they have just said. Um, that's rude, or they rephrase it in a way that gets to what they actually meant, which isn't rude at all. So I encourage people to sometimes use the active listening strategy as a way to slow down a conversation to get people to think. The other thing that that does is if someone doubles down on their rudeness, it gives you the chance to then step back and think about how am I going to respond if they stick with this rude behavior. So those are some of the things I advise people.
Oh, that's fantastic. And just as we wrap up, I do want to say, what is your relationship with rudeness now? Do you still feel like you're working on it?
I feel like I'm always a work in progress. So I feel like it's a frenemy of mine that, I know some people who are leaders in different fields of mindfulness or whatever that say that they've gotten to the place where like they don't have reactions, they don't have emotions really, that they are able to rise above that, and that may be their experience that they have, and that's great. I just don't think in the experience of being human that I can ever say, oh, I'm rude free. I try to be if I'm going to be the out there preaching the dangers of rudeness and incivility. Well, ideally, I'm mostly trying to model that behavior. But am I perfect? No. And I hope that that makes my message and me more approachable to say, I'm in this struggle too, and I'm trying to work on the same things.
Fantastic. If you had a magic wand and you could solve one problem in the world, what would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, Magic wand. I think. There's so many things I would want to change, but I think I would try to get everybody adequate health care because I think that without the basics of, and I suppose I want to throw in adequate nutrition as part of adequate health care because I think without the very basics, people are not going to be able to focus on some of these larger issues when they're simply worried about survival in terms of the very basics of physical survival.
Let's double tap on that. What do you mean by adequate and what do you mean by healthcare?
I thought I might get away with that. Ayush, rats. Uh, well, I think obviously what's adequate nutrition is going to, here's the it depends, but truly it's going to vary based on the individual, but getting enough calories and in um, appropriate amounts that are for our health, protein and carbohydrates and fats, like that to me, when I say adequate nutrition, that's what I mean is the amount of calories as well as in the combination that's going to work for people um, in terms of their health. And healthcare, yeah, it's something that we're struggling with in our country about what is adequate healthcare. I personally believe that everybody has the right to have healthcare, access to healthcare, and ideally care that is preventative. Because I think if we were able, for people being able to get access to preventative care, it often prevents some of the more chronic disease and illness that we then end up dealing with. And certainly in our country, I don't know about how I think our outcomes may be worse than those in many respects of Canadian the healthcare system because of the choices that our country is making right now in terms of how preventative care is not seen as important. Nutrition is, I mean, I think we're changing, but nutrition's not great. And I think it really is a disease model as opposed to a um, health support model.
Oh yeah, 100% agree. Uh, yeah, I feel like we can solve it with technology in so many respects, but I think that's another podcast episode.
Mhm.
Last question for you. What gives you hope in the world?
I'm so glad to end on this question because I think we've talked so much about some of the frustrations that people are dealing with. I think meeting individuals, when you meet people as individuals, I think the vast majority of people want to be their best versions of themselves and want to help others. And when you can peel away the politics or the stress that we may be experiencing at any one time, I believe honestly that people are basically good. And I certainly see that in my state, in the United States, in Maine, that that we still certainly have our disagreements about politics and differences of belief systems, but when we have snowstorms, when we have hurricanes, when we have natural disasters or other things that affect us, our communities come together. And I felt like even in the pandemic, although there was some tension, our state was very much together and aligned for the most part. That's what gives me hope is seeing that people, I think, are wanting to be the best versions of themselves, and that's the solution, I think, to the problems we're facing.
Dr. O'Brien, I'm fully in alignment with your mission. I thank you for not being rude to me. I hope I haven't been rude to you during this podcast. Um, where can we find you to support you?
Oh, thank you so much, Ayush. This has been my pleasure, and it's been some really interesting questions. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. So, people, if they're curious about the book or the work I'm doing in the book, they can check it out at rudenessrehab.com. You can find me on YouTube at Rudeness Rehab, or the work that I do, coaching and consulting and professional speaking, you can also find at my website, www.activatesuccess.org.
Fantastic. All of those links will be in the show notes. Dr. O'Brien, thank you so much for today.
Thank you, Ayush.